Welcome to Wayward Writers. I'm senior literary agent and author Heather Cashman.
I'm author and writing coach Stephanie Bearce.
And I'm author and writing coach Nicki Jacobsmeyer.
Our mission is to nurture and enrich established writers throughout their publishing journeys.
We welcome all genres, age groups, and publishing paths through video podcasts, online webinars, in-person retreats, and more.
We're here to help you conquer your path.
Welcome to this episode of Wayward Writers. We're excited today to have with us Melissa Helton, and she is going to be talking to us about writing essays. And this is not the essays like when you wrote in school. This is fun essays that we want to be writing.
And we want to read, for sure.
Yes. So, Nicki, will you tell us more about Melissa?
Yes, I'd love to. Melissa Helton is a literary arts director of Hyman Settlement School. Her work has been in Shenandoah, Women of Appalachia Project, Still, The Journal, and more. Her chapbooks include Inertia, A Study in Hewn. She is the editor of the anthology Troublesome Rising, A Thousand-Year Flood in Eastern Kentucky, and Untelling, the literary and arts magazine. Her work has been supported through the Kentucky Foundation for Women and has been awarded prizes in poetry and nonfiction. She has taught in colleges and universities for 17 years and is a dual citizen in the UK. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you guys today.
We're excited to talk with you. I met Melissa, I guess it's been a couple of years now when I started to do my research for Kentucky Pack Horse librarians, and we were talking about guests, and it's like, oh, we need to bring Melissa on to talk about essays. She's just, I don't know, it's a wonder. I love to just listen to you and your passion about it. So before we deep dive, can you share your writing journey with us?
Yeah, and also I'd like to say I'm super excited about the historical marker that's going to be put in Hyden, Kentucky about the Pack Horse librarians next month. Super excited about that.
So exciting.
Yes. I didn't set out to be a writer. It was something just that I always did as a young person. It was a way to entertain myself, to process. I kept journals. I wrote really terrible poetry as an angsty teen, as many of us do. And I took maybe one or two writing classes in college, but my bachelor's degree is actually in environmental studies, and I wanted to do wildlife rehab and conservation education, specifically with sea turtles, but there's no ocean in Ohio, just so that complicated things. So I was doing wastewater treatment for a car factory in Detroit for several years, and I was like, this is terrible. So I went back to school and got an MFA, which led me into teaching, and it was the first time I was really serious about learning about writing and doing my own. So I'm primarily a poet by training. And then, of course, through multiple college degrees, I've done a lot of academic writing and the joy and nightmare of that kind of writing, specifically the 200-page dissertation. But meanwhile, I was writing my own poems, and I started to publish a little bit and got a couple essays published. And that has led me, I left education, higher ed, to work at Hyman. And so now I'm surrounded by creative writers all the time. And so I get to do a lot more writing, which is good. And then the editing work that you mentioned in the intro.
It's so great.
That's fun.
It's such a great place.
You are the editor of the anthology Troublesome Rising, A Thousand-Year Flood in Eastern Kentucky, and Untelling, the literary arts and arts magazine. How does this affect your own writing, or does it?
Oh, it absolutely does. It's like when you're an educator and you spend all your time helping other people be better academic researchers and writers, and you spend all your time grading. And then when it's an evening that you often don't have energy for your own words. And I find the same in editing. It's far more delightful than grading Comp 2 essays, but it's still the same kind of energy that you're putting into reading, not necessarily reading just for fun, but reading with an editorial eye. And so then when I go to sit down to write, oftentimes it's difficult. And with Troublesome Rising, the flood anthology, that was a massively emotional undertaking, helping the community process and document its grief. And even now, just this Sunday, I was in Lexington doing a reading on this anthology, which came out last year. And people were processing their Helene flooding traumas and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So every time we come back to this anthology and crack it open in community, I become this story absorber, and I'm happy to play that role where people, because always people come up and tell me about the flood they went through in 1977, and so that's an honor, and it's emotionally taxing in a lot of ways. But Untelling, the journal comes out twice a year. So right now we're doing submissions through October 1st, and then we'll do it again in March. And so that's a rolling all the time thing. And so it's often hard for me to write my own stuff. And so I have to come at it sideways. Like, I'll teach a class and make myself write the prompt that I give the class. Or I'll start by cutting paper or doing watercolor or something, and then I'll start writing words on it. And so if I start through a visual image, sometimes I can like ambush the poetry or ambush the writing sideways, because sometimes I just feel tapped out and it's hard to bring out my own words when I've been neck deep in words all day at work.
Yeah, I understand that 100%. When I'm editing, I have a really hard time, like editing my clients' manuscripts. I have a really hard time with my own writing. Having enough creative energy, having good ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's different. Like, even when we come to our own work and we're just reading it versus editing, you know, how, like, to learn the craft, right? You want to read. And sometimes you go to read someone else's work that's already published, but you're reading it like a writer, not a reader. And I'm doing that right now. And I'm learning so much, but it is exhausting. And I can't imagine then adding this emotional layer of these real experiences that people have had. And you become like a counselor and therapist, I'm sure, Melissa. And
Absolutely.
It's, you know, I think that's awesome, though, that you try to trick your brain and how to get back to your page. So I like those hacks. Those are
some great strategies. Yeah.
For sure. Okay, so a lot of us aren't familiar with structure with essays, at least the good ones, not the ones that kind of make us squirmish from school with red pens and all that. But how do you define a publishable essay, and how is that different from like our personal journal entries?
I think one of the great places we find ourselves in modern lit is that we're blurring all of the genre definitions that seemed standard. That you can approach a piece and you're like, is this a prose poem or flash fiction? Is this a hybrid lyric essay or is this something else? And so that's a really tough question to answer. At the baseline, an essay is true. Now, there's a difference between something being true and something being factual. And that's sometimes a blur when you start talking about nonfiction, because I may not remember that exact conversation I had with my father when I was 8, but I remember the truth of that conversation. And so there's that blurry gray area of inventing dialogue that I know his character was likely to say, even though I don't have an exact transcript of what happened in 1987. And so I think there's that whole other conversation of truth and fact. And they're not always the same thing. But I think at the base level, our essays are true. They can be very poetic. They can sound like poems. I've read essays and nonfiction pieces, creative nonfiction pieces that it reads. If you were just reading it to me, I could envision line breaks and stanza and white space and all that around it. And some of them are very standard, almost like an academic essay, as you're going through with proper transitions and complete sentences and well-developed paragraphs and all that. I think what makes something publishable is that there's some universal characteristic that's being discussed or shared or explored through the specifics of that essay. So I could talk about my fear of the dentist when I was a child, and my readers may not have had a fear of the dentist, but they can recognize something in it that is a fear that they had of dogs, or a fear that their sister had of rainstorms. Or I think that the specifics connect us to the universal more than big, sweeping, grand, cliched gestures and things. And so we need it to be true. We need it to be somehow relatable or universal to the human experience that people can connect to. That makes them care about it. And also, people want to read something new. So even if, it's the death of your mother. Millions of us have gone through that. The rest of us will probably go through that. but show me something that's new or unexpected or nuanced. I think that's a very important characteristic when we look at all kinds of writing, whether it's any genre, because I can read a poem about how much you loved breaking beans on the porch with your granny, but if it's just like a hallmark stereotype image of a sweet granny on the porch, I'm like, yeah, that's great. But if you show me something about it, about her or about you or about the situation, let me have a new experience as a reader and a human being, then I'm interested. And to me, that's what makes something publishable, is that if you want to keep reading it and you're like, oh, I want people to read this, well, to have the experience that I just had as a reader. And that makes me want to publish it.
I love that. I definitely, like everything you just said there, when I'm going through my queries, that's what I look for. Like I look for that kind of that universal but still very defined perspective or something fresh and new that it brings to light. I love that. So do you just start out like writing and then it turns into an essay, or do you think of a theme that you want to explore, or how do you find the central hook of your essay? What is the whole process of that? And I think finding the hook was like what you just said, like that is the universal, or the hook can be like the really super interesting, unique thing that you're bringing to the table. There's lots of ways to have hooks and things, but well, how does that work for you? What is your process? Or if I wanted to go write an essay, like what would be my first step?
The easiest ones are the ones where I have an assignment. Somebody says, hey, I'm doing this book on women gardeners and farmers in Appalachia. Would you send something in? And I'm like, I have a starting point. That is very comforting because there's infinite other things to write about. And if you give me just one little corner of infinity, that's manageable. And then I can start poking around in that region. The rest of the time, sometimes it does come across as an idea. Like I went for a hike the other day. I was trying to stave off a panic attack, and being outside helps me. And so I was out hiking and I noticed how many flowers were blooming in September. And we think of here as the autumn coming, and I'm 45, so I'm middle-aged and coming to that part of life. And then, so I have this idea. I started taking notes of all the flowers that were blooming here in late September. And I was like, there's something there. There's an essay about blooming into this phase of life. My kids are grown. Mm-hmm. And so there I'm starting with an idea. A lot of times it just starts with what I'm already obsessively thinking about and researching and writing about. I'm obsessed with my mother's Norwegian heritage and how when they emigrated in the early 1900s, they completely lost all of their ancestral culture, like many immigrants in the early 1900s. They refused to pass it on to their children because they didn't want to be Norwegian Americans. They wanted to be Americans. The kids didn't speak the native language of the parents, things like that. And so I've been researching and writing about that for years. And so sometimes a new idea will come up, or I'll see a call for submissions that's asking for a certain kind of theme. And so I'll pick up things that I've already been obsessed with and exploring. And then sometimes it's just when I start noticing connections about things that I've already written that seem disjointed. So I have an essay forthcoming called Vignettes on Touch. And I was thinking about very poignant moments in my life that involve touch. So like the birth of one of my children was very traumatic. Or thinking about touching my father's forehead before I left him in hospice, knowing that I'd never see him again. Holding hands while having a fight with my would-be then ex-husband. Putting my father's ashes in the Pacific Ocean, then holding my new partner's hand, things like that. And I noticed this connection about touch, and I was like, what would happen if I put these side by side? And so I went through a bunch of files and put about 10 of them together, and there were themes and connections all throughout those that once I started looking for that in the writing that already exists, I was like, these are like Lego blocks. I can put them together to make something new. So I think for me personally, there's a lot of different ways to approach writing an essay, and I think it depends on the purpose, the intended outcome. Am I writing this just as personal therapy for myself, for publication, for whatever? And so I think it can, even within a singular writer, there can be a lot of different ways to approach the genre.
Yeah, just hearing you talk about it, Melissa, I feel like I've learned more about you in the past 16 minutes not only as a writer, but as a human, because you are authentic and vulnerable. And what I'm starting to learn as we've had poets, and now you're also a poet and essayist on, there is this self-awareness that I've noticed you bring to the page and share that allows your readers to connect with you on a whole different level. Like when you talk to, don't get me wrong, I'm not generalizing anyone, but like when you talk to genre fiction writers or something like that, sometimes they will let you in, right? But it's about this world over here. And that's, a lot of times we don't get to know them, but like we get to know you as a writer when you're talking about it and your pieces because of the connections you have to find and want to find for the piece. And I don't know, I'm just like completely humbled by it. And I think it's very brave and very meaningful for, it seems like, not only you, but your readers. So thank you for that.
Well, I think that's absolutely true, because especially if you're writing poetry out of your own experience or writing essays out of your own experience, to me, it seems like you have to do a lot of work to hide. You have to do a lot of wall building in order, okay, so how can I talk about an aspect of my childhood without bearing some of myself out there? And I think people who want to write but are very private and don't want to share those things, they do turn to other subjects or other modes, or they research and do academic writing or do writing that has tropes and pre-established scaffolding. We read a romance, we know that there's going to be enemies to lovers and a fake dating scene and a third act breakup, and you can plug your characters and your fascination into that scaffolding without exposing a lot of yourself. So I think you're right that the modes of writing, you have a very different position to the writer.
I think, though, that even in genre fiction, even in any kind of fiction writing, the ones that do the best and resonate with people are the ones where they have put at least the emotional weight of their experience into their characters' lives.
Mm-hmm. And you can tell because it's more
and you can
real.
Feel it.
Yeah, it's more real than you can identify it if you've experienced it.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my goodness, like they're letting me in, because you can't just research that topic and know that experience and write about it.
It makes me really think that if you challenged yourself, if you are a genre fiction writer or you're any kind of other writer, if you challenged yourself to write essays like this, your other writing would improve significantly. Okay, so I am motivated now to write an essay.
I know.
So
yes.
can you like walk me through how I would structure an essay so that it is personal to me, but it's also like I could share it and have this kind of universal resonance?
I'm not sure that there's a very strict kind of structuring for it. If we look at braided essays, those have a wonderful scaffolding. We take 3 different things and then we braid them back and forth in the essay. We talk about subject A and B and then C and then A again, B and then C. The weaving of those make a whole new thing, a whole new experience going back and forth between those.
Wow.
And
how long would an essay like that be? As long as I want.
As long as you want. I'm sure you could do and you kind of look at, if you ever read fantasy novels, they're braided like that. When you have a huge cast and then chapter to chapter, you go back and forth to the different parts of the plot. So we've got this kind of structure throughout several genres of writing. But I think if the point is to build in the universal and balance that with the personal, I'm not sure that there's as much of a very clear cut, okay, do this for a chunk and then do this. I think it's in how you handle the subject, and it may just be like a one-off subject. So one of my essays being published is about my Norwegian ancestors. And when my mother's last name isn't a Norwegian last name, when they came to America, they took the name of the farm as their last name. So they took a piece of the land with them in their name through Ellis Island. And so when my mother passes, this name is going to die out because it's not a real last name. And because of patriarchy, she gave me my father's last name. And so I'm grappling with this and talking about potentially taking this last name as my own and what would that mean, and wanting to take this name back to Norway. And so it's this very hyper-specific, my personal experience, my family's experience. But then there's like a one-off line that's saying, as a fetus, I grew inside of Jorgenrud, that last name, because I grew inside of my mother. And that was her last name. So even though I didn't come from the Norwegian Jorgenrud farm, I grew inside my mother as Jorgenrud. And then there's that universal little hook line that says, because in the end, the only land we really spring from is our mother. And regardless of the specificity of my case, that's true, that people, we come from the land of our mothers, whatever the context and specifics can be. So I think if you read essays and you connect to writing and you pick up on those pieces of universality in writing as a reader, I think that naturally comes out. But if you are concerned and you're reading this and you're like, wow, this is all just me, nobody's going to relate to this, nobody's going to give a crap about this, then you might need to step back and say, okay, where can I build that little side quest, that little bridge, somebody else be able to connect to it? And it could just be like one little sentence, like saying the only land that we actually spring from, regardless of immigration and migration and naming and patriarchy, we all come from our mothers. And what's more universal than that? But it may be something that you need to deliberately look and build in. And having outside readers can help with that. So is this just, do I feel like I'm just talking about myself? Can you connect to it? Is there a place where I can build bridges out? And if you have a trusted reader, they can help you see if it's like a one note or if readers of different types and demographics can connect to it.
So like a theme, right? What is the theme of this really about that everyone can relate to in a way?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's so fascinating. And
it may be in a sentence like that. And one of the other essays that is forthcoming, it's of me and my ex-husband and a friend of mine, and we were chopping down wood for firewood. And it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was just about cutting up these logs that had been cut down, and then just the labor of taking these home to store for later so that we would have winter heat, and about how loving people can exhaust us. That as we chop up this wood, and I also connect that kind of through a feminist lens, that women give and give, and as we cut and women give and give, then we can be exhausted and we can be left with nothing but sawdust in the end. And so it may be actual sentences, but it may be like the theme you said, when you step back and you're like, what is this actually about, big picture? Mm-hmm. And then I think that's a bridge that a lot of readers can connect to.
Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful because the trees might be different, symbolize something different for all of us, which is what's so great about writing, is that we all take something different from it. So it's beautiful. Okay, so when you're working with an editor for an anthology, how do you keep your voice authentic but still match the editor's requests? And do you have any examples of where, like, you maybe had to, I know you stand up for yourself regardless, but like that you had to be like, no, or...
Yeah, I have. And then also on the flip side of that, how do I as an editor make suggestions without... And so for the Flood anthology, we had about 60 writers who sent in work, and very honored Lee Smith sent in an essay, and where I wanted to put that, and she's talking about flooding in Grundy, Virginia when she was growing up, and that where I wanted to put it in the book, her essay was beautiful, and then it had a hopeful uptick right at that end, which was wonderful. But I knew where it was in the book. It was when the flood was happening, and we needed the uptick later in the book. So her little hiccup there, going with the flow of energy through the book. So I had to email Lee Smith. Lee Smith, to suggest an edit to an essay. Who am I? I was like, I'm a nobody. And so I was like, and I explained it to her. And of course, she was like, that makes perfect sense. Absolutely. Cut the last 2 paragraphs. That's great. And she was gracious about it. But I nearly had a heart attack because I was like, that's ridiculous. Like telling Bruce Lee how to do martial arts. It was so bizarre. But I think when we take people's suggestions, I saw more of this like in my MFA program, and I see it when writers show me their work, and you can almost tell that they came directly out of an MFA program, because there's a certain, specifically with poetry, there's a certain energy and flavor that's almost palpable, because you go and you sit and you have 7 people workshop your poem. And then if you take all their suggestions, your work is just going to fall apart. That if you take all their, do this to the essay, do that, and then you're nowhere to be found. So I think being able to take people's opinions and discern what is legitimate, okay, I will compromise that for the sake of clarity, or I will add that in because readers need that background. That takes some practice, because there were many pieces in my MFA program where I had a professor who was very specific about, I was very kind of wild and lyric, and she wanted my poems more grounded. And when I gave her the poems she wanted, they weren't the poems I wanted. And I think it's just a practice. And any kind of editor or professor who says, no, your work needs to be like this, they're not worth working with, because any editor wants to just shine a brighter light on the brilliant work that writer creates as they're writing. We may need to cut an end off or something, but
Do you wake up in cold sweat still from that, Melissa?
it was bad. It took me a long time to send that email, but it's definitely something as writers, especially if you're writing for publication, if you're writing to sell a book. If your electric bill depends on you being able to sell a manuscript, you may have to compromise more than when you can fight and say, no, the integrity of this, and maybe they won't publish it, but you need to keep it the way that you need to keep it. So there's a delicate balance, and it takes some practice as an editor and a writer to find the healthy balance in it.
If you can't find someone to publish, do you ever just post it yourself, or put your essay on Substack, or put your essay out in the world somehow on your website?
I do sometimes post things in private groups on social media, and sometimes if it's a piece that I just want to share, there's places like Lexington Poetry Month. Through the month of June, you can post, and that's considered publishing. And I think that all forms of sharing our work with the world is completely valid and wonderful. If you want to read your poems on a TikTok, if you want to go the self-publishing route, if you want to go the traditional publishing route, if you want to make little zines and just randomly sell them at a coffee shop, I think that art. And I get grouchy when people are like, oh, that's not real publishing, or this is such a good poem, you shouldn't just give it away on TikTok. You should keep it to lock up in a dusty journal on a shelf that nobody's going to read except 100 subscribers. I think that there's so much art to be given, and especially if you're a prolific writer, then do it however you want. If you want to I've seen those people who sit there on a sidewalk on a typewriter and just write random poems and hand them to people. I think all of it is valid, and certainly these days with consumerism and AI and the garbage dumpster fire that we're living in, all the art, the better. All the writing, the better. We need more voices. We need more expression, and do it however you want to do it.
Yeah, I love that. I definitely believe in that, because I do feel like we need to, if we have something to say that's going to help someone else, which I think that's what art does, I think it should be out there. And sometimes I do think that some of our work, absolutely, it should make us money, but not everything's going to get published. That's just the reality of it. I guess that's one of the reasons I like Substack, is because you can just put your stuff out there and you can charge for it if you want, and people can pay for it if they want. And anyway.
So when you're revising, Melissa, do you know when you need to stop editing with essays? Is it clear, or is it just like the rest of us where we just technically could keep revising to make it the worst piece? But we need someone else to go, and you're done. I know.
You're done.
Yeah, we would.
Take it away.
For sure. We would critique partners. We'd be like, you have until this date, and then I'm submitting your latest document. We were ruthless, but it works.
I think you absolutely can work a piece to death until you edit the life out of it, until you're doubting yourself. I think when I'm working on my writing, when I'm going back to edit it and revise it, I notice that if I'm tuning out as my eyes are reading across the page, then I need to step away from it. And that could just mean I need a break, or that could mean that there's nothing else that I can see that I want to add or change. And a lot of us have heard that if you spend some time away from it, you come back with fresh eyes. That's true of visual art, all the arts. And you come back at it, and sometimes you can see, oh, there's a big hole in there. It's really great to have other people's eyes on it. If you have a trusted reader who is a careful reader and isn't going to just praise you because they like you,
Right.
that they can actually say, this is part needs work. And I think if you've run through those things and you've looked at it and there's nothing else you can think of, and you've spent some time away and come back to it, and if you've had a trusted reader, then there's a point at which the next project needs you. The next thing you need to say needs your attention, because if you're not actively improving this one, then let it go have its life out in the world and start on the next one, because kneading bread too much, you can ruin it by overworking it. And so that's a delicate balance sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, too, you can step away and you can come back and you can say, I'm really proud of this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm done. I'm proud of this. It sounds like you have all these ideas in your head or things that you're working on, like you said. Do you keep some kind of book or file, or how do you keep all your ideas?
I wish they were in a one centralized location. They're scattered out. I've actively have about 3 or 4 journals going at different times, and they all have different purposes. And then there's a notes app on my phone where if I have an idea, I'll scribble it or take a screenshot of something. The problem is that when you go back and your notes app says, Dad is like bread, and you're like, how is my father like bread? I don't remember. You got to take good notes. I wish I had a way to be more organized, because sometimes it's just scribbled or it's in a voice memo, or you go back to find it and you're like, which of my 4 journals did I put this in?
Mm-hmm.
I need better organizational skills. I think that would help me. But then I do, once I am serious about a piece and I move it from whatever scrap of paper it's on to the computer, I will make sure to draw a line through that journal page so I know this is not the most recent. It has moved into the digital realm. And then organizing all the files and all the folders on this desktop is a whole different beast that I don't have tamed or trained really well. There'll just be like a folder that says middle-aged woman rages. And I'm like, what did I put in there? And then I go look and I'm like,
It's like a fun surprise every time, right?
yes.
I'm with you on the notes app. So a lot of times when I'm in bed, I don't know why I don't just put a pad of paper by my bed, but I don't, because there's not enough room is what it's at. But anyway, so I will email myself, whether it's like a to-do or a thing. And Heather yesterday emailed me and she goes, what does this mean? And I realized that I hit her name and my name. And it was comical. Okay, so here's my question. What can we do? Like, what can we learn from what are common reasons editors might reject something? Like, how can writers avoid that? What are your recommendations if they decide that they want to try to get it published, if that's the venue they want to go for?
Yeah. I would say first to be familiar with the magazine, the journal, the publisher, the series, the editor that you're sending it to. Because if somebody is really a traditional looking for market fiction and you send them some off-the-wall, hybrid, intangible, amorphous, magical thing, you're barking up the wrong tree. And it's the same with lit magazines. So you need to know where you're sending it and making sure that you're sending the right work to the right people and places. And follow their submission guidelines. I'm going through the Untelling submissions right now, and we accept it. You can submit in 2 genres. And then it's like a certain number of pages, or you can send 8 pieces of artwork or whatever. And then I saw a person yesterday had submitted in 3 genres instead of 2. And then they were like 4 pages over on their fiction piece. And I was just like, if you can't respect the guidelines that we've set for this, then, you know, that shows what you think about us and our time and our journal, that you're not following very simple and respectful guidelines. So definitely follow the guidelines that they set forth. I think when we look at making something that an editor and readers will respond to, we've talked about making it universal, making it nuanced. I think that when things come across my desk that I'm like, this is beautiful writing, but I have to pass on it, a lot of times is that it's a very common experience. We're not seeing that new experience for the readers, or it's cliched. If we're looking at things specifically for untelling, and we do prioritize Appalachian writers and artists, but we take work and publish work from all over. And I think one risk that Appalachian writers have is that there's been so many terrible stereotypes against us and against our region that we want to show the good, which is legitimate, but then we only show the good. And now it's biased and off-balanced. And like Silas House says, we don't want to make it precious, because nothing is 100% good and sunshine and roses. So I think of one of the poems we published by Chrissy Anderson Peters, and it's like Granny's Kitchen 1970s. And so you're reading, and it's the kind of thing we would expect of an Appalachian grandma in her kitchen. There's the cast iron, and she's making biscuits, and it's really warm and homey and beautiful. But then what Chrissy does in the last line, she talks about how in this glorious kitchen that this is where her grandmother was trapped. And that's the nuance. That's the thing that we can hook onto, that it's not just propaganda of how good things are. And I see that a lot in our Appalachian writers, is because we don't want to give fuel to the people who are going to be like, oh, look, she's talking about drug addiction in her family. See, those hillbillies with their drug addiction. But you know what? A lot of us have drug addiction in our family. And to hide that because we don't want to give ammunition to the people who hate us is doing a disservice to the art that we can be making. So I think making sure that we're not being precious, or we're not just giving a cliched kind of response in our art is really important.
Yeah, it is. And let's all be honest. It's not like everyone doesn't know someone is battling drug addiction. To say that's a stereotype in a certain region is pretty naive. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. So, do you have any maybe rituals or habits or ways that you keep yourself writing, ways that you keep your motivation up or be consistent?
No, you got any suggestions?
I love it.
That's what we should do. We should have a workshop where we all come together and just share anything.
It's chaotic. And so I try to give myself writing prompts. So like have you ever heard of the Stafford Challenge? It's this challenge. It's a national thing. This is the second year. The challenge is to write a poem a day for a year. And
Whoa.
So one of my writers through the Hyman Settlement School said that they were going to do it. I was like, oh, we can do a Hyman cohort, because if I make them do it, I'll write some myself. And so I create these kind of experiences, or when I'm teaching a class, I'll try to write alongside with them. And sometimes if I pick up a book, I will give myself a writing assignment. Like I'll read a book of poetry and I'll pull out beautiful lines and write them in a notebook, and then write a cento, which is a poetic form where you borrow lines from other people's poems. And here's my poem from Jim Minnick's book. Here's my poem from Crystal Wilkinson's book.
Wow, that's cool.
Just to engage that part of my brain, or pick up a nonfiction book about poisonous plants and say, Melissa, you have to write 4 poems about poisonous plants before you're done with this book. Because if I don't, it's too easy not to write. And also, I don't know about you guys, but I write the same, because the same things obsess us and horrify us and delight us. So like I've got 1,000 poems about the same subjects, because that's what I'm thinking about today, because I think about that every day. So giving myself little assignments like that. But also I'm really blessed to work here at the Settlement School, because we have retreats and classes and workshops, and I can sit in and audit them, and just sit in on a class taught by Willie Carver or Joy Priest and listen to the assignments that they're given to other people, because I'm staff, so I can just sneak in the background and learn along with them. So that is an amazing privilege that helps me write when I'm stuck.
That's
cool. Wonderful.
I need to get another job or something, though. I love that's a great perk.
Yeah.
We all
It is.
look at what we have and find ways, but it sounds like you've got a lot of ideas, Melissa. Pat yourself on the back, because that's huge.
Yeah,
though.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to see like how it could translate to, if you're like, for a non-poet, what could I do when I'm reading a book? Because you're right, it is easy to be like, oh, I'm going to read and then I'm going to go write. You know what I mean? And writing's hard. It's just hard. And that's why we don't always go running to it. But I love also like getting with community, like hearing a prompt or linking arms with someone and doing a challenge, whether it's one you've created or part of a community. That's huge.
Yeah, I think if you find a type of assignment to give yourself that you really respond to, I've done that with fiction as well, where I know like I'm grouchy about having to go to the grocery store and do these mundane tasks through the day and just say, I'm going to find a character today. And then I'll be stuck in line behind some old man who's buying charcoal briquettes and cat food. And I'll just write one scene of this man, what happens when he gets home. And that's a good way to engage that writer brain, even when you're just standing in line at Walmart. And even if you don't write it, you're writing it in your brain and you're having that experience. And then hopefully you bring it eventually to the page. But I find I have to give myself very specific assignments like that. Like you're grouchy about going grocery shopping. There's a character at Walmart. You're going to write a scene
There
about.
is a character at Walmart, Melissa.
And it's entertaining.
And not just one. Sometimes we're that character. But
yes,
it is. That's great. I love it. Okay, before we do our lightning round, what is one piece of advice you wish you had heard before submitting your first essay?
I don't know. I think because I did so much publishing in poetry, book reviews, academic publishing, by the time I got to the personal essays, I knew to consider the publication or the editor you're sending it to, especially with nonfiction. And also, I encountered this in poetry with some of my first chapbooks, that we need to consider the other people who are impacted by what we write, because when we tell our story, we also overlap and tell parts of other people's stories. So even simple things, one essay, the one about the vignettes on touch. So I was just telling my daughter, I was like, part of your birth story is in this essay. My other daughter had a pretty bad bike wreck, and we found out that she had this medical condition. And I want them to read that and give an okay, because I'm telling part of their life and making it part of the public record. Like 15 people are going to read it. It's not like it's on the nightly news, but I still want them to have some kind of autonomy when it comes to me publishing things about their life. But I think that's important for anybody who's writing essays to consider. And that doesn't mean that just because the person says no, I don't want you to publish, it doesn't mean that you can't. A lot of times people don't want you to tell the truth about them if they've treated you poorly. And there's that old adage that like if people wanted you to write better of them, they should have treated you better. So you have to make that moral and ethical decision yourself about what you will compromise for the sake of the other people mentioned and what you need to say despite their opinion. I think that's really important when we're writing personal essays, is considering who is impacted. And then also projecting into the future of, do I think I'm going to regret? So I'm angry about this now. 20 years from now, when I'm no longer angry, am I going to regret this? Maybe. And trying to do those kind of self-reflective thought exercises to see if you do indeed want to publish it the way that you have it written.
They're great.
Yeah, that is great advice. All right. Should we do our lightning round?
Yes, these are fun.
Lightning round. Are you a morning writer or a night owl?
Both.
That's awesome.
Writing music, silence, or background noise when you...
Oh, silent.
One publication you dream of writing for?
Salvation South.
Tell us about it.
I think I've looked at some of the work that Nima Avashia has done, that Annie Woodford has done, that Robert Gipe has done. And I appreciate what that publication is doing to show, like we keep talking about, this nuance of the Southern Appalachian experience, especially in days where we have all this kind of outside pressure that wants us in binary boxes, that wants us divided and separated. And I appreciate the things that they do to make a platform for people to come in and discuss complicated things through their art.
Well,
It's great.
this was so delightful chatting
Yes,
with you.
thank
I feel
you
like
so
I've
much.
learned so much about essays and maybe,
Well, and just writing in general.
and how it's all
Yeah.
the art we create. And thank you so much for
Wonderful.
being with us, Melissa.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Wayward Writers.
Let's connect. Find us at waywardwriters.com, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
See you next time. Conquer your path.